So hello everybody and welcome back to the JS Foundation's JS Dev Zone. Today I'm your host, Darcy Clark. I'm a community member, creative technologist, founder, mentor, and developer advocate based here in sunny Toronto, Canada. And today we actually have the delightful pleasure of talking with Brian LaRue, who probably needs no introduction, who's the co-founder, CTO of Begin, also has worked on a number of projects. But I'll let you introduce yourself there, Brian, and maybe let us know a bit about, your involvement in the JavaScript community and some of the work that you've done.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here. So I guess I started off with JavaScript in the very late 90s, doing what everybody else did, image rollovers. And, I've been at it ever since. It's a fascinating language. Early on, I did a joke site called WTFJS, kind of documenting all the weird inconsistencies of JavaScript. Language has changed a lot in the last 20 years, and it's been with me the whole way through, and it's obvious surprise domination was kind of a lucky chance of history or accident of history, if anything. And yeah, I love it. It's fun. It's a dynamic language. It's got first-class functions, and it seems to run just about everywhere. So that's why I'm here.
Pretty smart choice a number of years ago, I guess, to invest heavily in that.
Yeah, but, I mean, it was luck if anything. I was a Flash dev for a little while, which is probably where I learned more about ECMAScript than in the browser. The browser, it always felt like we were fighting it. But then after, the web wars started, it became obvious that VM is going to become the driver behind most compute. And well, here we are today.
For sure. So in this, essentially this segment, we are trying to highlight some of the projects that JS Foundation supports, and including this most recent project that you've been working on, Architect, which was just launched this past week at Node Summit. Could you, tell us a little bit about what Architect is and your involvement, I guess, with the project?
Yeah, you bet. So Architect is a set of tools for provisioning infrastructure on Amazon Web Services currently, but we're looking at other platforms too. And in particular, it's for setting up provisioning and deploying cloud functions, which in Amazon land is Lambdas. We go way past that though. We also allow for setting up HTTP endpoints, scheduled functions, and just as of today, really quite selfishly, I added the ability to provision and deploy a Slack bot in a couple of minutes using Architect, awesome. Because our company Begin.com is using Architect internally to do all this stuff. It's pretty exciting. We think this is probably the future of how most apps are going to get built.
That's awesome. What advantages do you think cloud functions, or essentially what's the primary goal, you would say, of the project?
I think it's to make things easier. So in the world of servers, we got pretty good at it, and the server thing is still obviously the dominant paradigm in which we think about building an application, and that's really a kind of a thing that came from the past. So we used to rack physical servers, and then we started using virtual machines to scale, and then later on we started to adopt container technology to orchestrate and build these things a lot faster. And the thing is, with containers, VMs, and physical servers, the metaphor is a server. Amazon rolled out Lambda, I don't even know, I think it was a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that you have a single function as a deployment target, as a piece of infrastructure. And this is a complete change for the metaphor. We don't really know how to build these things yet, and everybody's still thinking of things in terms of servers, but really we should be thinking of things as events and discrete endpoints that are isolated from each other. The Architect kind of fell out of developing Begin.com, where we learned these lessons the hard way. Setting this stuff up and provisioning cloud functions today is fraught with complexity, and the last generation of tools basically copied the server metaphor, and so they're not very useful. Architect defines a very simple plain text manifest so that you can set up and provision infrastructure in a couple of minutes, and even better, our deployment times are in the seconds. And I guess the main goal would be to make this stuff easy.
Yeah, consolidate and make everybody's lives much better. And concern yourself with the real problems you're trying to solve. That's awesome. So
Exactly.
what advantages do you think that generally Cloud Functions bring to the market?
Well, everybody's excited about the pricing model right now. So Cloud Functions and Lambda in particular, with AWS leading the way, is roughly, well, it's free for 1 million executions, and I think it's roughly 20 cents for every 1 million executions after that. So if you've got a large app and you're scaling it and it's getting hit a lot, it's not going to cost very much to run that thing.
Savings is huge. Yeah.
Savings is huge, but I'm actually not that interested in that part. I'm very happy to pay for my infrastructure, and I don't mind doing it if it makes my life easier. Rolling deploys of VMs is expensive and time consuming. And so maybe, an instance on EC2 isn't going to cost too much, or if you use something like Xites now, it's going to be just about free as you scale it up. But the smallest unit of compute there is your entire application. And so as your application grows, your rolling deploys grow. And it's not uncommon to see a rolling deployment take upwards of 40 minutes in a mature application. In Cloud Functions, we can deploy endpoints discretely and one at a time, and a typical deployment for about 40 endpoints for us is about 10 seconds. So this is significant because this means my developers get more at-bats, they get more chances to iterate. And we all know that if we have more chances to iterate, then we're going to crush our bugs faster and we're going to deliver features faster. And so it's just more economical use of our time, but there's more developer satisfaction in being able to deploy this quickly. The other big advantage for me is the isolation. So it's not uncommon to have your entire app be your payload. And when that's the case, if you make a mistake, your entire app goes down. Cloud Functions, because you have discrete little events and endpoints for everything, if you make a mistake on your register page, your forgot password page isn't going to go down. And that's a big deal from a durability standpoint and a bug isolation standpoint.
For sure. So, I mean, you sort of touched on it in terms of, what are the problems really the project's trying to address in terms of, developers' pains to deployment, quick iterations and speedy deploys are amazing. And definitely even compute costs, like getting down to, that functional level of, what's the smallest means of compute. Are there any other problems you find that this addresses, or maybe even the consolidation of being able to eventually deploy across these different Cloud Function infrastructures might be, something that's coming up or in the future?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so Architect's main approach is very similar to the traditional approach of doing infrastructure as code. The problem with infrastructure as code, you're committing Amazon's configuration knowledge and server configuration knowledge into your repo. With Architect, we define a super high-level plain text manifest file, and so we're sort of saying that the infrastructure as code was the last generation of tools. This generation is concerning itself with architecture as text, and that seems like a very trivial statement, but if you've ever set up, a server with an Ansible playbook, you can get an idea of just how bad it can be with deeply nested YAML statements and all the arcana that goes into setting up a complex configuration. With Architect, all that's gone. You're just defining your endpoints. We generate the functions, and we immediately deploy them in both staging and production environments, which is what you want to do for your dev team. Have this high degree of isolation. The other piece that Architect takes care of is running offline. Building for the cloud's nice, but developers need to work locally. And so we built that in as a first-class citizen.
That's awesome. What do you find the benefit is for JavaScript developers, maybe specifically?
JS devs are kind of an embarrassment of riches right now, which I think a lot of the rest of the industry is sort of butthurt about. But I alluded to this earlier. The browser wars brought on VM wars, and JavaScript VMs are the most highly tuned in the industry. Interestingly, early on, Ryan Dahl, when he created Node, he felt startup time was a place that he could compete with the other virtual machines because V8 starts so fast. V8 has to start fast because we don't have a lot of time to kick up a web server.
Hmm.
We typically will see about a 40 millisecond cold start. So when you're deploying these little tiny Lambda functions into the cloud, they can cold start at any time. Every other runtime, you're looking at upwards of a second of cold start, and that's really terrible latency in the web. With Node and Lambda, we see about a 40 millisecond penalty to a cold start, so we just get superior performance as the outcome. I'm bullish on the future of these other languages as compile targets to WASM. I'm sure we'll see them all make a comeback, but for the moment, I think an investment in JavaScript just makes good sense, especially for the long run.
Yeah. So we've got jobs for another couple of years.
Yeah, a few more.
Few more.
Maybe I'll understand CSS by then.
For sure, or we'll just be compiling everything to WASM for sure.
Right.
So how did you sort of touched on it a little bit, but how did Architect essentially get started, or how did you conceptualize this with your team?
Yeah, we actually didn't really start Architect. We built Begin.com, and Begin's a bot. It hangs out in your Slack, and you can do lightweight tasking with it. It also has clients for iOS and the web, and we're just in beta and rolling it out. And so unlike some other solutions, we didn't sit down and talk about how to build a great framework. We've been mostly concerned with how to build a great product. Turns out, even if you're building a great product, you're going to be either using or building a framework under the hood, and I think we were in denial about that for a little while. And now we're very firmly aware that we not only are we building a framework, but having that code just be internal to us is more liability than asset. And so it just made sense for us to take it Architect and extract it from our internal tangle of tools and build that into its own standalone thing that our developers can learn and grow.
That's great. So you would say that it's pretty well dog-fooded at this point? You guys have sort of eaten and worked with this code for quite a bit, and now you're exposing it to the greater good.
Yeah, and teasing it out of the actual product has been an interesting challenge because there's a lot of things that we baked in that just most frameworks aren't even thinking about, like the isolation between stages of production and staging and offline for testing isn't something most are thinking about. But, when you're building a product, you have to think about those things because you need to have your iterations, cleanly divided from your production customer base. And so it's like all these little things that are really nice because this is actual real world use, not our idea of what a framework should look like, which largely is usually based on the metaphor of servers in the last generation of technology.
For sure. So why did you choose the JS Foundation over any one of the other sort of competing foundations that you could have gone with? Why does it make sense for Architect to live here?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, JS Foundation is kind of becoming the sort of center of gravity for JavaScript in the broader open source JavaScript ecosystem. There's a lot of good pedigree in the other projects that are there, and there's a lot of great people that are involved in the foundation. I think it's important for Architect to kind of stick close to its roots, to be a JavaScript first solution for the cloud. And it just felt right. There's a lot of other great projects there that we could learn from and grow from together as a community. And I really believe in the foundation model as a way for open source to flourish.
Yeah, it's great to be a part of that, which is also underneath the Linux Foundation, and you've had some support from foundations and some experience with some of your previous open source projects to know that to start out with licensing and that kind of support can probably yield amazing results down the line.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know what you're alluding to here, so I'll just directly address it. We in my former life, I worked on a thing called PhoneGap, and that thing we actually eventually it was always open source, but the IP was wholly owned by Nitobi Software, and then we got bought by Adobe. And there was a very real risk for a moment there that source code might not continue to live in an open source fashion. So to ensure that it did, the founders of Nitobi and I worked really hard to get it open sourced. We were working at that time with IBM, and IBM is a big proponent of the Apache Software Foundation. We couldn't use the name PhoneGap because that was sort of tied up in some legal stuff. So we donated the source code of PhoneGap, which is kind of confusing, to the Apache Software Foundation as Apache Cordova, and then we redistributed it as PhoneGap. under Adobe. And that was great. I learned a ton of stuff at Apache. I don't really have anything negative to say. I think Apache's situation currently is that there's just a lot of projects there, and the governance model is a little bit older, and it's not focused on the JavaScript ecosystem the same way that the JS Foundation is. So it didn't seem like it was the appropriate place for this particular project, but I'm still a member of Apache. I'm still very proud of the work that that team's doing today, and I still lurk around those lists.
For sure.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense when you're talking about a foundation that has JavaScript in its name. I think any project that you is tightly tied to that language, it makes sense to be a part of this. And obviously, there's a little bit of a history lesson there for anybody that probably didn't know that. I'm sure there's lots of folks I didn't know before you had told me, the story behind how, PhoneGap got brought in there. So.
Yeah, it was a good experience.
Yeah.
And I got to say that things have changed a lot. Apache's old school, like this comes right back to the earliest web server days. And, those guys were supremely concerned with the future of the web. And that's why PhoneGap was really appropriate for that particular foundation. Something else just to mention, the foundation model, I think, is the history lessons are being a little bit lost these days. People are concerned about, how open source gets funded. And spoiler alert, open source gets funded by paying software developers to work on it. and
Yeah.
when you do that, people are talking about all these different models these days, but if that source code's in a foundation, it's also under governance, it's legally neutral. And this allows other people, such as big corporations, to contribute development hours to it. And it works. It's been working for over 20 years in some cases. So yeah, that's why I agree with this as a model.
For sure. It can also often be hard to get those resources, time. So, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense for sure. So where do you see the future of the project, or where do you think that in the next few years we're going to see Architect potentially, explode, or where do you see the future for the project, even with features or anything?
Yeah, so feature-wise, we're using it in Anger ourselves, so we're going to keep building it and supporting it and growing it. I'm pretty sure we're going to see it get ported to other clouds, so multi-tenancy is going to be possible. I'm definitely keeping my eye on Azure. I feel like they know a lot about how this cloud function thing is going to roll out and what's going to happen there. And IBM's supporting with OpenWhisk, which I also see getting a huge amount of adoption in the enterprise today, because not everybody's going to just jump on Lambdas and cloud functions. It's going to be a transition period. And we're still in the very earliest innings. I did the opening talk at Node Summit there, where we shared Architect for the first time. I asked the crowd who's doing Lambda stuff. Maybe a third of the room put their hands up, but very sheepishly. So this is the earliest moments. I don't think this model or the metaphor is fully sunk in yet, and it's gonna take a couple of years. People are gonna see these benefits in deploy times and the simplicity in maintenance without having to deal with any of the managed aspects of servers. It will undoubtedly become the model of the future. Whether or not Architect is the tool people use, it's neither here nor there. I think the model itself is what we're going to see grow. Hopefully, people choose Architect or at least kick the tires and tell us what's broken for them. But I know I'll be using it, and our team on Begin.com is going to be using it for sure.
That's great. Well, thank you for sitting down and chatting with us today around this project. I think it's awesome, and I know I'll definitely be using it in the future. So I look forward to where it goes, and definitely those integration pieces will be awesome to see, and contributions from the likes of Google and Microsoft will be important, but I'm sure they'll be coming shortly. So thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Darcy, and we'll see you on the internet.
For sure. Take care.
Cheers.